Thank you everyone for joining us. Good evening. My name is Dr. Michelle Tovar, and I am the Associate Director of Education Latino Initiatives here at Holocaust Museum, Houston. Before we begin, we ask that you please submit your questions for our guest in the Q&A box or the chat box. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Together We Remember Coalition, and an organization that brings people together across lines of difference to counter identity-based violence and make meaningful progress toward a world of never again. Leading this evening's presentation will be Cain Trevino, an alum of the museum's Engines of Change Student Ambassador Program. Engines of Change introduces Houston area high school students to Holocaust history and enables them to better understand current issues and to develop their own informed opinions and voices. By encouraging young leaders to recognize that hate, prejudice, and apathy continue to harm individuals and society as a whole, this program encourages the next generation to care about and confront these perils. We are honored to host this evening, Cain. We're honored to host you, Cain. Thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you, Decalocal and Dr. Tovar. Hello, everyone. My name is Cain Trevino. My pronouns are he, him. And I would like to thank you again for joining us today. Before we move on, I would like to take a moment to recognize the lands we are on and allow others to do the same in the chat or out loud. Firstly, I'm joining you from the unceded lands of the Tongva and Ashaman people who have worked, protected, and cared for these lands for thousands of years and continue to do so. I would like to take a moment to honor our ancestors, our relatives, and our relations. Now, I'd like to introduce Mr. Eduardo Canales, founder of the South Texas Human Rights Center, for a moment of silence and dedication.
Mr. Canales, we cannot hear you. You have to unmute for just a moment.
Okay, I'm sorry. There you go. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this very important event in terms of respecting, honoring Maria Jimenez, and in terms of her long history of fighting for human rights. I did her and my collaboration together spans about 45 years. And if you can put that slide where, there you go. I met Maria in 1968 at the University of Houston, and you know, with the Mexican American Youth Organization on campus there at the University of Houston, and then also with the United Farm Workers Union support work that was taking place around the country regarding their efforts to organize farm workers in California. I always say that my roots are, and this is roots with Maria Jimenez in terms of her participation with the Raza Unida Party, a third party movement in the state of Texas from 1968 to 1978, that we're pressuring the Democratic Party at that time to open up and serve the interests of the Mexican American community. You know, there was a statewide political campaign. There was also Maria running in 1974 as a state rep candidate, and myself running in 1976. After that, Maria left to Mexico, and there's certainly certain to continue organizing and the radicalization of her organizing skills and involving the Zapatista movement in Mexico. I recall when Maria came back, please help me, Stalina, in terms of some of the time period here. But when she showed up, I was the director of the Centro Nacional de Servicios Sociales And, and she says, well, it looks like all the Raza Unida folks have crawled into the woodwork. And, but you're doing this work, Eddie, and I want to continue working with you, and our collaboration continued, in terms of her efforts with ARCA, the original legalization program in 1986, Justice for Janitors campaign, and with SEIU, and then I left Houston, and then came back a few years later, in terms of organizing with the Industrial Council of the Carpenters. And Maria was immediately part of the Texas Immigrant Rights Coalition, and she brought me in terms of the work that was needed here in the state of Texas. So there was a driver's license campaign, and believe it or not, it was a legislation that was passed, but it sat on Rick Perry's desk and did not become a law. And so I always say that my roots, and it goes back in terms of beyond the Raza Unida Party and the third party movement, National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. It's an organization that exists to this day. We go back to the mid 80s, and Maria was a board member, and I was also a board member, and I'm the chairperson of that organization right now, the board of directors. Maria did an incredible work with the American Friends Service Committee, and instituting the first project that ever existed in terms of human rights abuse under alum, Immigration Law Enforcement Monitoring Project, and documenting human rights abuse. People talk about constitutional rights or due process or civil rights, but in this case, we need to document the abuse, the human rights abuses that take place at the border, and Maria was on the forefront of doing that from the very beginning. And I come back to the present in terms of our continued collaboration. I mean, we worked. She reached out to me from the coalition in Houston United, Houston Unidos, and the Texas Civil Rights Project, and undertook a project that revolving the question of migrant deaths. I'm here in Corpus Christi, and Maria and I have a conversation, and we're saying, people are dying 1 hour. There's a humanitarian crisis 1 hour from where Corpus Christi is. I was working. I was taking care of my parents at the time, and she explains, "Can you help out?" This began in terms of the Working Committee on the Prevention of Migrant Deaths in 2012, and recognizing the corridor that exists to date right now in the Migrants corridor that exists right now in the Texas border. And we began those efforts in terms of finding out how people were being treated, and how there was no access to private ranches, and in terms of rescues, and the county at Brooks County was not documenting through DNA people that were being buried. So over the period of 6-7 months, we came to be the founding of the South Texas Human Rights Center. Maria and myself and another person filed the original corporation papers, nonprofit corporation papers, and she certainly is one of the founders of the South Texas Human Rights Center. I can't say enough in terms of our collaboration over the years, in terms of in the Southwest and in some international forums. But Maria was an engine of change, and fighting for human rights is something that her legacy will remain for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Canales. And it is truly an honor for me to be able to support the work of Maria Jimenez helped to build in Texas and beyond. As a high school freshman, I applied to be in the Engines of Change Student Ambassador Program because I wanted to connect with other students in Houston that were also interested in current events and how to overcome the hate. Since then, my interest in human rights continued as I learned about issues related to migration, borders, and xenophobia. As a senior in high school, I applied to join the Together We Remember Youth Action Fellowship Program, um, and I had the opportunity to meet and be a part of a global community of youth activists who work to transform our learning into action. As I worked to develop my social action project, I became interested in the way art can help an audience understand issues related to migration. Next slide, please. As a TWR fellow, we have the support of the program to design and lead our own projects. As I learned more about identity-based violence and the violence occurring along the U.S. Mexico border, resulting in migrant deaths, it became clear to me that what was happening was, in fact, a mass atrocity. Around the same time, I also became aware of Hostile Terrain 94, a participatory art project sponsored and organized by the Undocumented Migration Project, a nonprofit research art education media collective directed by anthropologist Jason De Leon. The exhibition is composed of over 3,200 handwritten toe tags that represent migrants who have died trying to cross the Sonoran Desert of Arizona between the mid-1990s and 2019. Tags are geolocated on a wall map of the desert, showing the exact locations where remains are found. These installations simultaneously take place at several institutions, and this spring, Hostile Terrain 94 was included at the Blafford Gallery at the University of Houston. I thought this was an opportunity for Engines of Change students and staff to participate in the installation. Part one of my social action project was to invite Engines of Change students to participate with Hostile Terrain 94, invite them to bear witness, and keep the lives of those who have died along the border alive through remembrance. The second part of my social action project has to do with supporting honorable organizations like the South Texas Human Rights Center and helping students and others be familiar with their work to end death and suffering on the U.S. Mexico border. And now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Eddie Canales.
Thank you very much, Cain. That was, very interesting in terms of your commitment and your becoming engaged in the question of human rights and our efforts there. Can I see my slide presentation?
You should be able to see it. It's on the screen. Can you not see it?
I have one slide that's kind of twisted right now in front of me.
Can you see the front slide? Just a moment. Can we see this?
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
In 2012, Maria reaches out to me and says, "Hey, Eddie, can you help? You know South Texas, you know the region, you're from there. We're beginning to find out that the corridor and there is a humanitarian crisis with people being died in 2012. There was 130 bodies that were recovered and skeletal remains recovered in Brooks County. Next slide, please. This is where Brooks County is. It's not on the border, but there is a checkpoint there, and it does represent all the globalization ramification, all the consequences of globalization, and the need for essential workers in this country coming through that corridor. Next slide, please. Our mission is to end migrant deaths and organize with families searching for missing migrant loved ones. The forensic end of it is something people are not aware of it, but establish human rights forensic infrastructure to identify border crossers. And that is very, very critical. I mean, people have been searching for their loved ones for over 20, 25 years in terms of the identification and where people are buried and who's got their all the data banks in this regard. So organize and advocate for humane, fair, and just immigration policy. And then, of course, increase our public awareness of migrant deaths and the militarization that causes the major part of that. Next slide, please. We have over 175 water stations to sustain the life of migrants crossing through South Texas. We have the Missing Migrants hotline to process calls from migrants and their families throughout Central America, Mexico, and the United States. This is something that we do on a daily basis. There's one call that I just received a while ago in terms of forwarding, trying to do a rescue, or in this case, a recovery based on some GPS coordinates that families get, and it's very difficult for them to even get that. We're a forensic identification of remains with Forensic Anthropology Center at Texas State. That is operation identification. The slide there, can you establishment of human rights protocols for exhumations? Next slide, or raise that slide. There you go. Those were our basic mission statement. The predicate to all of this, of course, is in the Mexico and the United States borderland, you have a policy called Prevention by Deterrence, Operation Blockade in El Paso in 1993, Operation Gatekeeper in San Diego in 1994, and uses every government-funded military force in the United States to take an enforcement-only approach. And that's what I've been saying, for the last 5-6 years, that enforcement-only approach is not working. Why are we jailing and incarcerating workers whose only crime is coming to the United States to become an essential worker? Communities of migrant workers who have been crossing the borders since they were drawn are now facing militarization and criminalization. And that's when we refer to as criminalization of the workplace, it is exactly that. And where workers present themselves to work, and with any authorization to do so. So we need the new approach here in terms of is a different approach beyond the enforcement approach. Militarization is what's taking place. You have checkpoints across the Mexico-U.S. borderland. You have a border wall. You have detention facilities all over the United States, especially in small communities. And you have 13 migrant youth jails in the valley, in the Rio Grande Valley sector alone. So we're having to deal with those consequences in terms of the excessive militarization, and armies of Border Patrol agents, over 20,000 police using military-grade equipment, U.S. troops sent to the borderlands. In this respect, I mean, Texas does represent, for immigrants, a police state, because you have state troopers down there, you have the National Guard down there, you have the Border Patrol agents down there, and then you have the laws that allow local police to stop them and question their immigration status, the law being SB 4. Next slide, please. This reflects the number of deaths from 2004 to 2020 in Brooks County alone. This is the number of recovered deaths. This year already, in 2021, we are at 34 already, and we have not entered the summer at all. So, June, July, and August. That's why we're preparing, to maximize our water station deployment this weekend and the next weekend in terms of continuing to have as many water stations out there, and then enhance our capacity on the hotline so that we can um, um, do more rescues based on where people are left behind, and their locations that are ascertained through smartphones. 823 represents what has been recovered in Brooks County alone. A lot of people say that for every one recovered, we're talking about maybe 4 more, or we're talking about 3 more. If we said 2 more, we were talking about over 2,500 people in the, have perished in Brooks County alone. Um, this represents, I think, a low number, but we're there's no systematic way to find all the remains and human remains and bodies that are out there in this valley. South Texas is a bare ground, just like the Mediterranean is for a lot of immigrants. Next slide, please. This kind of gives you a comparison, and we're compiling the 2021 numbers right now, but this is kind of pre-COVID, and then you have after COVID in terms of what was going during COVID. As you can tell, prior to COVID, people were being detained and placed in detention centers. So let's not fool ourselves that the separation of families was taking place in the inner cities, through ICE raids and everything, and separation of families and people going into detention. This is calls that we ourselves received, and we found these people in detention, and we continually attempt search and rescue and recoveries, and we're being very successful over, I think, a 1 week period. I think I had about 8 successful people being retrieved from a migrant in distress, being retrieved from the brush. This represents about 30% that are still missing. And look at the figure in terms of what happened in 2020, and the fact that it reverses in terms of 70% are missing and 30% have contact with Border Patrol. And this is what we base these figures on, having, sending requests from Border Patrol and then responding to our requests. Next slide, please. Migrant private prison system pre-COVID, COVID, expulsion under Title 42 and Remain in Mexico program, which is, leveraging and putting pressure on Mexico, and Trump having his say in terms of not allowing and decimating refugee programs, asylum programs, the TPS programs all over the country over his administration. So, I mean, again, this is what is happening, throughout the 4 years of Trump's administration. The border wall was obsolete at the moment that the construction took place. There is now no construction taking place, and there's due process for children, and not so much. Again, I think this, I have to correct this. Not so much for family units. There's a discretion there, but most children get due process. Second, next slide, please. Some of these recommendations I've had for a while, and they still remain pertinent in terms of less enforcement and decriminalizing migration. As you remember, in the presidential election, there was only one individual that called for the decriminalization of migration, to decriminalize migration, and that was Julian Castro. Commend him for that, and him also calling for a Marshall Plan to some degree, for the Central American countries. I think he definitely learned and grew during the campaign. More due process and amendments based on family resident ties. the system right now is, somebody is backlogged incredibly. Everybody has the same numerical, uh, uh, every country has the same numerical number, total number, but they run out from Mexico, Hong Kong, China, the Philippines and stuff. So there's some things that can be done, but based on family, maintaining families together. Um, as you notice, during the Attorney General got rid of crime and domestic violence visas applications for asylum. Those need to have been reinstated. More transparency within the USBP and ICE, and I'm an advocate for abolishing ICE. I think that's epitomizing when we say defund the police. Their tactics were horrible and very and destructive of families. So take those monies and put it into humanitarian aid, humanitarian efforts. Um, Initiate federal border patrol checkpoint inspections designated in border counties. Um, well, I mean, you have a checkpoint, but it's not a designated border county in Brooks County where Farfuris is, where we have the center. And then equal and humane treatment of border crossers. It is a horrible situation taking place right now. Next slide, please. We have relationships with Brooks County Sheriff's Department because it's necessary in terms of having access to some of these ranches. We take all the missing migrants. The hotline takes the missing migrants calls for the sheriff's office. We have an MOU established in terms of how we collaborate on those on that process. Borstar is a rescue unit that Border Patrol has, and they'll be staffing up during the summer in these areas, where there's more traffic, but those should be permanent in every Border Patrol station. And as I search here, maintain 2 search and rescue units in the area of responsibility and the use of more cadaver dogs. It is, they are responding as much as they can, and I think that's in terms of what the more we put them pressure on them, the more we rescue people and migrants that are lost out there. The prevention by deterrence policy is spreading people out to the more dangerous areas, and the biggest area of concern right now is the Big Bend area, where there's a lot of people that are going through there and getting there's a lot of a loss of lives there. More resources and personnel to respond to remote areas. The 911 system is not perfect at all by any means. Just having a discussion this morning in terms of we have numbers for all the Border Patrol stations throughout, but we need numbers for the dispatch of these jails inside, because we get calls from migrants in distress. They're saying, "Well, I'm trying to call 911, but nobody's answering, and it's not picking up." That's a technology issue that we need to address. I believe that's it. Next slide. In the border militarization now, I mean, this is part of the fence that exists there in Brownsville. That concludes my presentation, and I'll also want to take the opportunity again, commend the Holocaust Museum for hosting this event, and Cain, I really am I'm glad that you reached out to me, and this is very important in terms of recognizing the work of and the legacy of a person that fought for human rights for her entire life, Maria Jimenez. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Canales. All the work you do is very important. Now we would like to take a couple minutes to answer questions for anybody who wants to ask them. So anybody has any questions, we'll be taking around 10 minutes or so.
Go ahead and add those to the chat box or to the Q&A box. And I would like to also add, Cain, since we do have Dr. Selena Guerrero online on the call, if she would like to make any comments, we have the time as well to do that.
Yeah, I sailed through the presentation. I hope for the interpreters, I hope that I wasn't moving too fast. I don't know if I was even paying attention to the chat here, but I apologize if it was too fast.
Okay, Cain, I have a question for you. Why did you choose to focus on this organization? What drew you to the South Texas Human Rights Center?
Well, when I first started my social action project, I was researching all of the ways that migrants along the border face their struggles and how they live through this mass atrocity that is border violence. And in that research, I found several organizations that tried to provide aid to these groups, and South Texas Human Rights Center was one of the most prominent groups with their work providing water stations for immigrants along southern Texas and providing service groups and rescue groups to immigrants along the border. And I just really connected with their work, and my I began to familiarize myself with Mr. Canales, and we had a conversation, and I really found the importance of their work, and I wanted to spotlight them specifically.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We do have a question from the audience for Mr. Canales. If you could make the US public understand one thing about the US border that it is constantly misunderstood, what would that be?
Well, that the borderlands in itself is bicultural, you know, area where people intertwine, intermingle culturally, and economies are wedded together, and we need to look at the border as not a place to place a wall, not a place to um, continue to militarize. It's a place to where we can, have a receptive situation and regularize migration. I think that the pandemic, more than anything, showed the inequities, but the most important thing, the role that migrants play in this country, and that's it. I mean, the migrants are going to come one way or the other to do the work that nobody else wants to do it. We need to just change the policy and make sure we regularize people so they can come through in a regular, in a safe, orderly, and regular process, which is the Global Compact on Migration that has been approved by over 150 states already. So Trump was out of that process, but I think the Biden administration, will rejoin the Human Rights Council and hopefully engage in implementing those type of processes and pathways for people so that they don't die on the road to the American dream.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience and comment. Thank you for the presentation, Cain and Mr. Canales. I was curious about the policy recommendation to separate BORSTAR, BORSTAR, from the Border Patrol. Has that conversation gained any ground so rescued migrants don't end up in detention or deportation systems?
I recommended this a while back in the very beginning in terms of the question of resources. Again, when you take the policy as an enforcement only approach, then they're going to concentrate on that. But I think the window is there right now to try to in a sense, cut back on the budget, and when defund militarization also is something that needs to be looked at in terms of where how are we processing, how are we people that are essential workers. So the regularization is a process, is something that we can be readily done, and it's a simple process, and you will find that people will, if they have the labor mobility, and this is a concept that Maria Jimenez put out a few years back in terms of labor mobility. We deal with labor, with labor treaty, I mean trade treaties and stuff, and we're not dealing with the vital issue of labor. So it's important. I mean, Borstar, is part of some enhancing the humanitarian aspect of resources, to save lives right now.
Thank you. Our next question is for Cain. What would you like for young people your age to know about the border that they might not know or understand?
Well, one thing that I think is important for especially young people to understand going forward in the new wave of young activists to come, it's that the events happening on the border are in fact a mass atrocity. And when you talk, if you talk to some people, you might come across controversy that they're just deaths, they're unfortunate, that they're just that's what happens when you cross the border. But I think it's important to understand that this is a mass atrocity. This is um, a event of people that are being systematically oppressed and erased, and that have families, that have connections, and they are being I I would they are facing violence against a state that does not want them here and removes them uh, through the use of natural deterrence. And I think for young people, it's important to understand what migrants are going up against, and understand that their struggle is not just crossing the border, but it is dealing with a violent state that is using the environment against them and is using any means necessary to get rid of immigration.
Thank you, Cain. Mr. Canales, are conditions in the detention centers better than they were a few months ago? This is from our audience. You are on mute, sir. Sorry.
Let's remind people, the population, the audience, that Title 42 is still in effect. So people are being expelled as we speak, even also family units. I have, contacts, and one of my board members are facilitate immigration processes, and people are being, a woman and a 10-year-old child are being expelled back to Reynosa, and a lot of single women and single adults are being expelled if they're found out in the brush. So the due process question is not in full in effect question. It's there for children. So the detention facilities for children, we should not be jailing anybody. We should not have the children in jails at all. So whatever the processing needs to be, more streamlined in terms of, at a minimum, the requirement was that within 72 hours, these people would be in a different situation, but it's not working. So more resources need to be placed into the border, and children need to be released to their sponsors as soon as possible, and because conditions are deplorable, and things won't change in that respect.
Thank you so much. And we do have, again, Dr. Selena Verrial on our call. Thank you again for joining us, Dr. Verrial. You can, there we go, okay. And you can unmute as well.
Well, I just thank you for including me. My mom worked on acknowledging the deaths along the border, even with, she wrote a report for the ACLU in 2009. And so her work began documenting these kinds of problems early on. And I think that the work that Eduardo Canales is doing is really important. And I know people who have volunteered with him, and I think it's sad that it has to exist in the first place, but I'm glad that it's there to help locate people and to get answers for the families who end up asking, you know, what happened to my loved one.
That's right, Selena. It is about the families, you know, in terms of where do they turn to? And I think that that's the biggest, you know, for me, it's the biggest satisfaction in terms of being able to listen to families and know that for them to know that we are making the best effort that we can, and they're not having to deal with other entities that are not really prepared to listen and empathize with what's going on.
Thank you so much. If we have any other questions, please add them to the Q&A or chat box.
Again, I apologize to the interpreters that I was speaking pretty fast there, but
No worries, you were great. Thank you. We have one, yes, we have a question from our audience that's asking, is the Mexican government helping with the situation?
not really. I mean, again, I mean they're on that side, and they're you got to understand that Mexican children are being not processed like Central American children. Their Mexican children are expelled immediately back, you know, to the border because they're, you know, that's their country, and they're fleeing the same conditions that Central American countries are. Very, very violent, you know, drug-ridden communities, and in that respect, and corruption. So, I mean, people are not, they don't leave because they want to. It's a necessity. So we need to address that on a binational basis in terms of the U.S. and Mexico, in terms of how we're responding to the needs of the Mexican unaccompanied minors. And that's been going on for a long time, even during the 2014 with Obama. So,
Thank you. If we don't have any other questions or comments from our guests, we can go ahead and pass it over to Cain.
Thank you, Dr. Tovar. If you wouldn't mind switching to the call to action slide.
Yes, just one moment. Let me see if I can- Cain, could you see that, or it wasn't showing up? I apologize.
I don't think it was showing up.
Okay, just one moment. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today. We do have a call to action. Yesterday marked the beginning of hurricane season, and as summer days grow longer and hotter, deaths along the border inevitably will as well. Today, I'm asking for your support to help the South Texas Human Rights Center continue their important work along the border. You can learn more at southtexashumanrights.org. Next slide, please. And lastly, I would like to thank the family of Maria Jimenez, Mr. Eddie Canales, and the South Texas Human Rights Center, the language justice team at Tecolotu, Wendy Warren and Dr. Michelle Tovar, the staff at the Holocaust Museum of Houston, all Engines of Change student ambassadors. Together we remember founder David Estrin, staff and other fellows, Hostile Terrain 94, Professor Nicolas de Genova, Dr. Soledad Alvarez Velasco, and the Department of Comparative Cultural Studies at the University of Houston, as well as everyone who joined us today and all human rights workers and supporters across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Cain, and thank you to our guests who joined us today. Thank you again for our audience who also joined us tonight. If you are in the Houston area, our newest exhibit with Stand Latinx Art in Times of Conflict is now on view through October. We hope that you can join us on June 16th for a virtual conversation with Dr. Taina Caracol, curating Latinx art at the National Portrait Gallery and beyond. Also, please join us for our first Summer Family Day on Saturday, June 12th. These events are free and open to the public. Please visit our website at hmh.org for more information on these events and for more information on applying to the Engines of Change program for the 2021 through 2022 cohort. Thanks again for tuning in and have a great evening.